with our panel, Karen Middleton, David Crowe and Gerard Henderson, and we'll go right past the obvious and go straight to the politics. The United Nations has set up an inquiry into the killings of almost 60 Palestinians in Gaza last Monday. Now, there are 47 nations on this Human Rights Commission. 2 opposed the inquiry, 2 of them. Who are they, Karen?
The United States and Australia were the only 2 countries, Barry, to oppose this resolution in the Human Rights Council. Australia's campaigned to get onto the Human Rights Council for a couple of years, and it seems in order to vote no. There were 3 countries that abstained, Britain, Germany and Japan, but Australia decided to go that step further. Now, Julie Bishop, the Foreign Minister, says this is justified because she believes the Council had predetermined its position because it issued a statement last week condemning what it said was disproportionate and indiscriminate use of force by Israel. So she said that was prejudging. And she also said that the resolution to set up an inquiry doesn't mention Hamas and should. So they were the reasons that she says Australia voted no.
Hamas would come up, though, in any investigation of the
Well,
killings.
you'd hope so, and you would think so. She says she's not ruling out supporting other external inquiries in future, depending on their merit, but they weren't going to support this one.
But if Theresa May's government can abstain, surely that would be an option for Australia to abstain. We look, Britain, Germany and Japan all abstaining. That's certainly a legitimate option.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We wonder why we're on the Council.
But it's also legitimate to oppose. I mean, the Council referred to peaceful protests. They weren't peaceful protests, they were violent protests. A Hamas official has admitted that of the 65 fatalities, at least 50 were Hamas activists.
Do you think they should be investigated?
Well, should Hamas be investigated?
The killings? Do you think the killings should be the whole situation?
Not by a council that's already predetermined that they were peaceful protests. They weren't.
Who should investigate?
Well, someone other than this council. We're talking about a vote on a council. Australia supported the United States, and some of our close friends like Germany and Britain have abstained. So there's some opposition to this, either in the negative or the abstentions.
Clearly.
And we decided to go with the United States on this one. We probably made our own decision on this one. But the idea that these were peaceful protests is completely untrue. If anyone's been to that area of Israel, you understand that if thousands or tens of thousands of people had come over that fence, the fence having been pulled down by Hamas activists, this would have caused mayhem within Israel.
I think
they didn't do that.
Well, the protesters were certainly throwing rocks, so that's not peaceful. But the question, really, I think people are asking is whether the response was proportionate or not.
There's 600 wounded. I mean,
yeah, that's true. The whole campaign was what was called the march. I mean, it was the march. I mean, theoretically, the march on Tel Aviv and the march on Jerusalem. Now, if the fence had come down, there would have been horrendous implications for Israel. And what the IDF, the Israel Defence Force, was doing, as I understand it, was stopping the fence coming down.
And you think that they can't figure out a way to stop these protesters, unarmed protesters, other than killing them?
Well, they did try to do that. They put up tear gas. They dropped tear gas, but they did all the other stuff. Their only solution to stopping
these people was to kill them.
Well, it wasn't their only solution. They tried other solutions. But Barry, if you've been living, say, I mean, from parts of the settlements in Israel, I mean, you've got to bear in mind this is Israel going back to 1948. This is within the Green Line. This has been Israel territory approved by the United Nations 70 years ago, and a nation that's been in existence for 70 years. Following the support of the United Nations, is entitled to defend its borders.
Good morning, welcome.
Good to be with you, Barry.
We'll come back to the budget, but I want to start with this vote in the UN, with only Australia and the United States opposing an inquiry into the killings. How do you feel about that?
Well, the government needs to explain why it was isolated as one of only 2 nations to vote against an independent inquiry. I would have thought, given the circumstances whereby we've had at least 58 Palestinians killed, over 100 Palestinians killed since March 30, that an independent investigation is in the interests of all. And no doubt, as with everything in the Middle East, it would find, if it were an appropriate investigation, that all the fault wasn't on one side. No doubt there has been provocation in Gaza. But international law requires a proportionate response. And those people who have guns on one side and on the other side has rocks, the people with guns have a responsibility to act in a way that is proportionate And people have seen this acted out on their television screens in the past week. And certainly I think that the government needs to explain why it has opposed this independent investigation.
So you're prepared to say the response wasn't proportionate in this case?
Well, I'm prepared to say what anyone who looks at this objectively would say, which is that when you have all of the fatalities on one side of a dispute, then there needs to be an explanation as to how those circumstances have been done. Now, there's no doubt that the primary concern, of course, is always to any fatalities in conflict and those who are injured and their families. But also, this is doing damage to Israel's reputation. I'm a strong supporter of Israel's right to exist within secure borders, but I recognise also the need for a two-state solution, and that requires a Palestinian state.
But the New South Wales ALP now have a motion, a successful motion at the last conference to unilaterally recognise the state of Palestine. Will that motion go to the National Conference, and if it does, will you support it?
That motion will go to the National Conference, I would expect, but we have a New South Wales State Conference at the end of June, and I should imagine that that resolution will be updated. I'll wait and see what the debate is at the National Conference and determine my position based upon my long-standing view that you need a two-state solution in the Middle East with a state of Palestine, with a state of Israel, both of them having secure borders, and making sure that that is in the interests of Palestinians and Israelis. For people who travel to that part of the world, when you recognise that Jerusalem and Bethlehem is like saying you can have security in my suburb of Marrickville from where I'm sitting here in Ultimo. They're right next to each other. We can't continue to have an ongoing, after 7 decades of conflict, there's a need for a resolution, and quite clearly the international community must play a role in that.
Do you, though, support unilaterally the recognition of Palestine?
Well, I support recognising a Palestinian state, but with Israel continuing to have a right to exist within secure borders. And my concern is that the possibilities of a two-state solution are being undermined by the ongoing expansion of settlements on the West Bank and in Gaza. And there's a need for the international community to recognise that this circumstance whereby people in Gaza now, we have 3 generations of refugees living there in circumstances without any economic capacity to have a decent standard of living, causing enormous frustration. And there's a need also to recognise that it's understandable that Israel feels under siege, given where it is in the world and given some of the Islamic fundamentalism that exists in many of the nations on its borders. But fundamentalism of any sort, be it Judaism, Islam or Christianity, is bad. What we need is a solution there, because it is providing fuel for instability across the entire region.